In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how you develop as a human being and what happens when you go through too much misery in life.
One of the other things that seems to me to happen to people in university is they don't really get educated about how important what they do actually is. And I think that goes along with the nihilistic cast of modern people. It's easy to view yourself as one little dust mote floating around in a stadium full of dust motes and air. So you're all disconnected with each other, and none of you have any causal impact on anyone else or on the whole. But I don't think there's any reason to conceptualize yourself using that model at all, because the first thing that is very easy to notice is that you're very much networked. And so over the course of your life, you're going to have direct and relatively profound influence on several thousand people. And some of you maybe more, and some of you less, but we could certainly say 1,000 people, and each of those 1,000 people will know 1,000 people, and that's 1,000,000, and one step past that is 1,000,000,000. And so you basically sit in the center of a network that with very limited extension covers virtually everyone on the planet. And that's becoming more and more true rather than less and less true as everyone becomes increasingly networked and connected. And so what that implies is that the things that you do, that you choose to do, or the things that you choose not to do, are going to have effects that ripple far beyond your particular individual existence. And so part of what that means is that all of the choices that you make as you're confronting the unstructured future, as you move through your life, are going to alter the structure of being itself. And one of the things that, I've showed you guys repeatedly that hierarchy of action, right? With the highest resolution level being the things that you actually do with your body, the muscle movements that you manifest in the world, and showed you how those are hierarchically organized into higher and higher systems of value. And when I showed you that hierarchy, the thing I put at the top was be a good person. Well, I think that can be elaborated out in a reasonable manner so that it's possible to understand more and more what being a good person is about. Part of it is that you have to have organized yourself into something that's well structured and useful, and I think you do that by disciplining yourself and by adopting some role in the world that's meaningful and profound, so that you have to, so that the stress and demands of that organize you into something that's strong and flexible and productive. And so that's one element of it. I think of that as a kind of apprenticeship element. And I think I learned that mostly from Nietzsche, because one of Nietzsche's claims was that in order to become properly developed as a human being, you had to undergo a process of voluntary slavery in some sense. You had to give yourself over to some sort of role. Perhaps it doesn't even matter what role, so that you became an expert at that. And that was going to cost you in that you're going to be bent and twisted into that role, but it's also going to discipline and organize you. And the alternative is to become nothing. And that's not a useful alternative. So you want to become something, and then once you become something, well, then you want to be able to transform that something into whatever's necessary at that particular point. And I think that that's where the ideas that are associated with hero mythology start to become particularly relevant to considerations of higher order ethics, because the hero in mythology is the representation of the human being insofar as mankind understands what it is to be human. And what the hero does is confront the things that he or she does not understand and take what's valuable from that confrontation and then reintegrate it into the personality and the society. That's why the hero goes out to where the dragon is and takes the gold and then brings the gold back to the community and distributes it. And so I would say, well, part of being a good person is being good for something. And then another part of being a good person is being better than being good for something, because you want to be not only good for something, but you want to be able to be good for something in a way that keeps making you better and better at being good for something. And that means you can't just be something, it means that you have to become something constantly. And I think that a tremendous amount of what constitutes the intrinsic meaning of life can be found in that attempt to continually expand and reorganize as you're expanding. Because this is a Jungian idea. I mean, human beings are cognitively dynamic creatures, and we find intrinsic worth in participating in that cognitively dynamic process. So, and then I think outside of that, there's another question, which is, well, what is it exactly that you're aiming at? And my experience has taught me, and this is partly a consequence of studying archetypes for a very long period of time, I think the fundamental question that's on the very outer reaches of the hierarchy that's associated with ethics and morality is, are you trying to make the world a better place or a worse place? And I believe that every time you make a decision, when you could go one way or you could go another, that in some sense you're acting out your conviction in relationship to that highest order question. You know, and you say, well, would people really work to make the world a worse place? And the answer to that is, well, if you have to ask that question, then you should open your eyes, because we know the answer to that. And the whole 20th century was full of decades and decades. In fact, the most important information that you can derive from an analysis of the 20th century is that it's pretty damn certain that people are willing to work to make everything as terrible as they possibly can. And that's definitely worth considering, because if people are willing to do that and motivated to do that, that probably means that you're willing to do that and motivated to do it too. And I think it's fairly easy to understand why. I think the reason that people are motivated to do that sort of thing, is to do terrible things, is because they're angry at the conditions of their life, they're angry at the conditions of being, because being is composed of suffering and vulnerability, and people lose and they suffer and they get resentful and angry about that, and they feel hard done by, and that the entire structure of the world is aimed against them in some unfair manner, and then they get revengeful and corrupt and feel that everything that they do is justifiable given how much torment and suffering they've been living through. And once you move into that particular realm of thinking, your ability to start to make things worse starts to accelerate exponentially.